Hey guys, this is going to be the NZXT Super video. Now mainly we're going to be taking a look at the S340 case, but to look at a case you really got to put a build in it. So we're going to put an X99 Deluxe from ASUS in it and do a build. Now this is also going to have a Kraken X61. We're going to mention the Kraken X41 with the G10 GPU adapter. So liquid cooled GPU, liquid cooled CPU with dual radiator, 1000-watt power supply, and the X99 platform, all in the S340 chassis. So stay tuned. Now the first thing that I notice is this case is not quite as heavy as I'm used to NZXT cases being. Not that it's light, it's a pretty hefty case. It's just, usually NZXT cases feel like they're made out of solid lead. In this case it's steel and plastic construction, sort of got a plastic front with a sort of a steel inlay so that it's really glossy. And then you get the side panel with the window. We're just going to rip off the plastic here. Now the thumb screws won't fall out, they're the retention kind, which is a nice feature. Now a quick glimpse at the back, you can see nothing too fancy. You get the fan mount, you got 7 expansion slots, and the cutouts for the motherboard and the power supply. At the inside, the first thing you notice is there's more black, except it's a different kind of black. This case uses a lot of glossy black, it picks up fingerprints, but on the inside it's sort of a matte black with sort of a textured finish. It's a nice finish. This matte glossy is a pretty consistent theme throughout this case. This is a better shot to show you sort of how that theme is. Now the front, even though it's plastic, has this metal cover, and so that's the glossy finish that you see here. But the plastic edge and the edge of the case, that's more of a matte finish. Now on the inside, it's got this cover. This is designed to cover the power supply and all of the wires from it, but you still got the grooves cut for the cooling, and then you've got the two 2.5 inch bays with the cable cutouts at the back. And then you can get a better view of sort of how the front sort of snaps on. Now all the edges are rounded, of course, so you're not going to cut yourself on any of the edges. And you've got this sort of metal cutout that's a sort of a raised area that lets you hide your cables that way. If your motherboard has right angle SATA connections at the front, this is awesome because you can plug your SATA cables in and they're completely hidden. So it's just more NZXT cleverness. You can see this case comes with 2 fans, one in the top, one in the back. The 2 fans that it comes with are both 120mm. At the back you can only use a 120mm fan, but on the top you could use a 120 or a 140. In the front it'll fit dual 120s or dual 140s. So you've got a lot of options for this case. Now the physical dimensions of this case are 200mm by 445mm by 432mm. The GPU clearance with radiators 334mm, or without the radiators 364mm, and you've got 161mm of CPU clearance. The lowest point on the cable management is about 16.5, 17mm, something like that, with the highest point being 168mm. So you've really got some good cable management options here. It has no 5.25 inch bays. It's got 2 + 1 internal 3.5 inch bays, and then you've got 2 internal 2.5 inch bays. Now as far as dust filters go, there's a really nice magnetized front dust filter the case comes with, and there's also a dust filter at the bottom for the power supply. Here's a better shot of the case with the front panel removed, and then you can still see the other side panel is still on it, and sort of how thick the front panel is. Now there are no vent holes in the front cover, but the top and bottom are cut out, and so the air comes in from the bottom and it comes in over the top. Now it might not look like it in the photo here, but this case has an insane amount of clearance on the bottom. So even if you're going to put this on really high pile carpet, I don't think the case is going to have any trouble breathing. That's one of the things that sort of bothers me about some of the cases. They've got air intakes on the bottom, but if you're going to put your case in the floor on thick carpet, the stuff that's on the bottom is never going to breathe properly. That's not going to be a problem with this case. Now on the other side, between the motherboard and the outside of the case, you can see that it comes with some cable routing, and when we do the build we're going to have to sort of change this around a little bit. But also that cable guard that I showed you guys earlier, it's removable. It's just screwed in with Phillips screws. So if you were doing something crazy like a push-pull configuration and that was in the way, you could take that out. Now your cables are going to be a little uglier, but I like that you can remove it so that you've got increased flexibility in terms of how you want to use your case. There's also tons of tie-offs on both sides with cable management here to tie off any cables that you have and route around the motherboard cutout, route around the top, route around the sides of the edges of the case down, and then you've also got room for routing cables at the bottom here, which is where your 3.5 inch drive bays are. Now from this side of the case is where you get in sort of that cutout area that's at the bottom. and that's where they've also sort of stuffed the extra +1. You might have noticed earlier when I said, oh, it's sort of 2 +1 drive bays. Well, the +1 is that you mount it to the bottom of the case and screw in from the bottom. So they also give you the thumb screws for the power supply sort of faceplate removal thing to make it easy to install the faceplate. And you're going to see just how easy this is with the NZXT 1000. It's a modular power supply. So you mount the bracket to the power supply and then you can just slide it in and thumb screw it. It works out really well. Now on top of the case, it's super minimal. There's not even a reset button. There's a power button that has a lighted ring around it. You get your 2 USB 3 ports, headphone, microphone, and then a hard drive activity indicator LED. And it's this sort of nice matte finish on top. It's not glossy. I'm glad that they did that because that's where dust and fingerprints would accumulate. Okay, let's get started with the build. Let's unbox the NZXT 1000. Okay, well, the power supply feels like a brick, and then it's got another brick of cables. So let's unpack that. Now, in terms of connectivity, it's all modular, but this power supply's got you covered. It seems like there's enough PCIe connectivity here to run 4 graphics cards. It's definitely got enough connectivity if your motherboard has 2 of the 8-pin power connectors as well. And then you've got a ton of peripheral cables, and you can mix and match with all the included cables. You know, as you can see, it comes with just about everything that you would need to handle whatever. I mean, this is a 1000-watt power supply after all. Now, one thing NZXT has elected to do is to use the high current variant of power cables. So, you know, the power cable that's been standard pretty much since the IBM PC XT, well, this one doesn't use it. It does use a standard power cable, though. This is a standard connection. It's just that you usually don't see this kind of connection outside the data center. And so if you've got an older server, rack mount server, like the old 4U, 4 CPU, crazy power, like super server, uses the same kind of power cords. Now this is a 1000-watt power supply. I think technically that's not really required, but they've gone on the side here and said, okay, we're going to do this. And I don't know that I blame them. There are a lot of peripherals now that come with cables that are only rated at 8 and 10 amps, and they really should be rated at 15 amps with the old style connector. This is guaranteed, to be 15 amps when this is this kind of a physical connector. So just bear in mind that if you get this power supply, it's not a power connector like you're used to, but it's still a standardized connector. You can order power supply cables, power cables off of the internet that fit this. This is not NZXT proprietary. It's just the next step up in terms of how much current it can carry. In terms of the specific connectivity, you've got the 1 20+4 motherboard connector, of course, 2 4+4 CPU connectors, you get 6 6+2 PCI Express connectors, 12 5-pin SATA, and 14 Molex, and then you get 2 4-pin floppy. If anybody out there still has a 4-pin floppy or something similar, well, there you go. So you could totally run 4 graphics cards with this, although you would need 2 Molex to PCI Express adapters. But still, I mean, that's crazy. 1000 watts, just nuts. Now we're going to be using it with the X99 platform, which of course drinks the power, and we're going to be using it with the 5960X. So of course that also drinks the power. So what's the breakdown of that 1000 watts? Well, of course it's a million amps and 3.3 volts. No, I'm just kidding. It's a 30 amps on the 3.3 volt rail and 30 amps on the 5 volt rail. Now 3.3 plus 5 volts are combined to be 150 watts, and then you've got 996 watts that are available on the 12 volt rail. That's equivalent to about 83 amps. Minus 12 volts is 0.8 amps, and the 5 volt standby current is 4 amps. So 4 amps of standby current means you're going to be able to charge your phone when the computer's off, at least through USB. Not really, but depends on the motherboard support and a few other features, but with 4 amps of standby power, you totally could do that. Now pay attention here, because you those of you in the cheap seats may have said, wait a minute, doesn't this add up to more than 1000 watts? Yes, it does. Why does it add up to more than 1000 watts? Well, because NZXT is cool. The 12 volt rail by itself is almost 1000 watts. All right, let's get cranking on this build. Now we're going to be using the Kraken X61 CPU cooler, liquid cooler, all in one, and it's designed to fit in the front almost perfectly here. There's a very little clearance between the radiator and the fans and the cable management bracket. Now the cable management bracket is removable, like I said before, so if you wanted to do a push-pull configuration, you could. You just have to take out that management bracket. I don't think it's going to impede our airflow, but it does stick up a little bit in front of part of the radiator. Now for the build, we're going to be using the Asus X99 Deluxe. Now this is a motherboard with a black and white color scheme, and it's also got two-tone black. It's got sort of a dark gray and a black, and that goes really well with the glossy and matte black finishes on this S340, and the white power supply is a nice accent to go with the white accents on the X99. So when we get this put together, it's going to look really slick. So one of the cool features of these NZXT cases is they have a peg sort of in the middle screw hole where the motherboard is going to go. It's not a screw, but it's a peg that sticks up, and you can put the motherboard on this, and it makes it a lot easier to align all the other screw holes. Usually the way I do it, if you've got a case that does not have this, I will put a screw in the middle as I can get on a hole on the motherboard, but I won't tighten the screw all the way down, and then from that one hole you can sort of bring everything else in the way that you need to actually screw down the rest of the motherboard. But NZXT, their engineers apparently think the same way, so instead of giving you a screw hole there, they just give you a peg, and honestly that works a little better. Now, we're also going to be using an M.2 SSD for this build. We're going to be using the Plextor M6E, the 512 gig version, because it's so fast. Now on the X99 Deluxe, those mount vertically, so we're going to install this bracket in order for it to be able to be mounted securely. Alright, let's go ahead and mount our power supply. Now we got thumb screws for the bracket, so we just got to take the bracket out with the thumb screws and then use the power supply screws to mount the bracket to the power supply. Power supply slides in like a glove. Now the power supply side of the motherboard cable has this extra 3-pin connector. I'm not really sure what that's for, but I had some trouble getting it to go in just right because the heat shrink tubing was too close to the connector. So I had to sort of finagle around with it a little bit in order to get it to go in there securely. I'm a little bit worried about this because if I pull on this or put too much stress on it, I'm afraid that it's going to be really hard on that connector. So just be mindful of that when you're putting this connector, that when you're doing your cable management, you don't yank on the cable and damage that smaller connector. The rest of the build is pretty easy from here now that you've got all that. It's really just down to cable management, routing some PCI Express power connectors through the holes, and then of course installing our RAM. Now you got to pay special attention to which slots the RAM goes into. A lot of these motherboards are really picky about installing it correctly, especially if you're going to be running, not a quad channel configuration. You're going to be running a dual channel configuration, and until DDR4 prices come down. So you really got to pay attention to that. And if you put one of these together and the machine doesn't post immediately, just shut it down, flip the power switch to turn it off, and double check and make sure that you've installed the RAM in the correct RAM slots. All right, let's pop a graphics card in there and then see if it posts. Now I'm going to install this Bromdignagian power cord. It's huge, and flip the switch and let's see what happens. And contact. We have boot. Look at that. Look how pretty that is. And for some reason my NZXT pump color is pink. Now the color you can actually customize. It comes with a USB connection and some software so that you can control the pump color. And mine's pink. I don't know why. I'm going to make it white so that it matches everything else. That's really not going to be a big deal. I'm going to plug it into a USB header, and I've got my fans for the radiator actually plugged into the motherboard. And I don't have to do it that way, but I like doing that because this particular Asus board has the really awesome fan control stuff and the really awesome fan control stuff in the UEFI. So I figure, why not? Let's just do it that way. The only thing that could make this better would be wrapping the cables. And I'm really a little bit surprised that NZXT didn't black out the motherboard cables as well with that 1000-watt power supply. All the other peripheral cables, those are all blacked out. I don't really think it would have been a big deal to go ahead and black out the motherboard connections. But since it's all modular, I bet you there's an accessory vendor somewhere out there that's selling pre-sleeved or pre-blacked out motherboard cables if that really bothers you and you really wanted to deal with that. Well, looks like Windows booted. That's good. I'd been using this on the test bench, so I didn't have to reinstall Windows. It was already set up with this motherboard. So now it's got a permanent home in this NZXT S340. Now, if we want to take it a step further and we want to do the GPU cooling upgrade, then we could, pop out our GPU, get the G10, the NZXT G10 GPU bracket, and then mount the NZXT X61 in the top of the case for additional cooling. Now, that'll be a second closed-loop radiator just for cooling the GPU. That would be pretty slick. Now in this you can really see the contrastiness of the how shiny the side panels are. Now the shiny side panel meets up with the shiny front of the case, and so it hides the matte plastic there, but you get the matte on the top. And this is the NZXT control software where you can control the pump, and you can see that I've already made it white. Now you can see, even though this is sort of a monster build, that I've got tons of room in here. I could run SLI. I could run 3 graphics cards if I really wanted to. I've still got two 3.5-inch bays that are the the slide in, slide out version, so I've got tons of room on the inside. But this is a relatively compact case. There's really not a lot of wasted room in here. It's not overly large. For as much stuff as can be crammed in this case, eliminating the 5 1/4 inch bays really frees up a lot of room. And so this is a really a relatively small case, but it's not cramped. It doesn't feel cramped. It feels like it's got good airflow. The temperatures are good in testing. I really think this build turned out well. Overall, I'm pleased with the aesthetic of the case, and I'm pleased with how the build turned out. So this is Wendell. This has been the NZXT S340, the NZXT X61 Kraken, the NZXT X41 Kraken, that's the 140mm version, and the NZXT G10 bracket, along with the NZXT 1000-watt Hale 90 V2 power supply. So this build is about as NZXT as you can get. If you're going to build something like this, or you have any questions, head on over to the forums at techsyndicate.com. If you liked the video, then like it so that we know to make more videos like this. If there's anything that I could have done differently, or you want to let me know that I screwed something up, well, let me know, I guess, in the forums or whatever. So this is Wendell. Until next time.